what a wonderful patchwork quilt has been offered today. I will tell you a story in a moment. I thought, given the breadth of things being spoken about by the panel, I might give a little cultural introduction to it, if you're open. Seem like culturally, what's the word? Cultural sponges. Taking it. So, yeah, I think it's relevant. So when I walk past here, I walk past where my great-grandparents used to live, which is above one of the many tasty Indian restaurants up there. My great-grandparents lived there about 100 years ago. And they all came from different Jewish cultures, from Turkey, from Romania, from Poland, from Russia. And I think there's something quite interesting in Jewish heritage to the story that is here today. Because another part of my work is around feminist spiritual and queer spiritual investigation into Jewish cultures. Often the things maybe from your own, if you've grown up with a religious culture, your own ones also had some things that were written down and things that were missed in the gaps. So before I tell you this story, which comes from a Jewish culture, we're living now, those of us who are Jewish, we're living in something that is called rabbinic Judaism. Rabbi means teacher. And it has its own founding mythology, which is that there used to be 2 ancient temples in Jerusalem, and when the second one was destroyed, all those folks had to leave Jerusalem. The Romans said, "We've had enough of you, time to go." And the foundation mythology of what Judaism became goes like this, that there were a group of scholars who managed to escape, some of them by playing dead, and they came to a town called Yavna, which isn't that far from Jerusalem, and they all said, up till now, this has been an oral, land-based culture. That is, all of our festivals have been about the cycle of the seasons, and they've been about going to the temple in Jerusalem. Now we do not have a temple, and we do not have a specific land. How on earth can we make an indigenous, oral culture portable? And so they started to use the written word and wrote down what is now known as the Talmud. So some of you might think the Jewish tradition is the Old Testament. In fact, it's the Old Testament plus about 40 volumes that are, this is why the people of the book is a thing. They stretch about this wide, and it's a sort of 1,000-year meeting minutes of a group of people trying to get an oral culture into the written word so that it can be portable. There are discussions between people who are living and dead. Any of you who've been to any kind of community organizing meeting, it's like that. And I know they sometimes feel like 1,000 years, but this actually is 1,000 years. And sometimes they're serious, and sometimes they're discussing horrendous misogynistic ideas, and sometimes they're telling jokes, and sometimes they're telling stories. And on one hand, how amazing, because most cultures, if they are land-based in any way, then if there's a moment of oppression or exile, then the way in which that happens means there is no time for anyone to ever write down anything or ever have any kind of discussion how to make it portable. Not at all. Either by oppression, enslavement, by being forbidden to do so. All of these things prevent most peoples from doing that. So on one hand, amazing. And on the other hand, only certain kinds of people get to be in the room. The scholars and the ones who had time and perhaps money to be able to sit around and be scholars, and those who took an interest in the written word, they all got to be in the room. But the artisans weren't in the room, and the farmers weren't in the room, and the women were certainly not in the room. And so whilst they did write down certain kinds of stories, we know that in folklore and what starts to become denigrated as superstition, there are also great and valid stories. And we now live in a culture that is, I will speak for myself, I now feel like I'm living in a culture that is obsessed with literacy. And sometimes, as one of my teachers says, speaks about oral traditions as pre-literate. Like we're on a linear path, and the first bit is the pre-literate, and the second bit is when, we find ourselves in literacy, as if one is an improvement on the other. But there is so much wisdom held in these stories that were not written down, and it is up to us to rebalance how much weight we give, and to remember that what is written is just one part of the histories, and it's up to us to scoop up the rest of the traditions, maybe in our own histories and peoples, so that they are remembered on our tongues as well. So this story is not in the Talmud, it's a folk story. But it's a story as much, a midrash as much, for something that's missing in between. It takes a little line of text, and a whole story has been created out of this line of texts. So the line of text might be something you've heard spoken in a few different traditions when they say justice. Justice you shall pursue. And whoever, over many centuries, created this story in many ways, has taken this one line and seems to be poking at the question of what does that one single line mean. And this was collected by a folklorist called Dovnoy, who collected stories from all over the Jewish diaspora, which is essentially all over the world. And as you see, many people lived with their neighbors side by side. And if you go to Poland or Germany, some of their stories look a little bit like Polish or German stories with princesses in them and that sort of thing. And this story was collected from a gentleman from Afghanistan, and like all good storytellers, I'll add in just a small amount of myself, and maybe when you tell it, you'll find a little of yourself in this tale as well. The shepherd came home to a house that wasn't there. Well, obviously, there was every sign of it. Its foundations were scorched deep into the earth. He had thought it was quite strange when he headed over the hill his way home with his dog yapping at his heels and the sheep just about managing to keep up. He'd seen smoke rising, and it reminded him of the days when he lived with his grandmother there, but he knew there could be no one there to cook. Well, he thought maybe one of my aunties has come to pay me a visit and she's already set the dinner going. But the smell, it was charred, and she wasn't one to burn her food. And as he tipped over the horizon and the green grass came with its rush of sweet evening scent, so did the smoke come rolling, charring its way up through his nostrils, down into his throat until it parched dry his chest and he caught his breath. Where the hearth had been, no wood anymore. Where the walls had been, mud bricks cast across the soil. Where the roof had been that he remembered his grandfather patting time after time, season after season, to keep them from the rainy days. Nothing but a skeleton and sky. And as he stood in the center of the house that wasn't there, he looked, and a small, trembling girl looked up at him, and she said, "I was told to wait here to give you a message. Your landlord said that he told you to move and you didn't, so now he's done what he has done, and you shall do what you need to do." And she ran and she left. And he felt all of the strength sapped out of him down into the earth, the way the water runs out of trees in the hard seasons and leaves them shriveled. So his knees were weighted down into the ground, and he crawled across the earth, his nails pushing down deep into the dirt. He raised his hands up, and he looked at the sun setting orange and aflame in the sky, and he called out, "Is there justice in this world?" But the sound, it spiraled over the heavens with the smoke, and no one replied, not even from up there. And he spent the night curled up with his dog on the dirt, and it was lucky it was a warm night and the stars wheeled over him. And in the morning he woke with a dream on his tongue. And the dream was this: of course God no longer speaks directly to me, not in these days of mortals, not I am a prophet. These days, God has answered with other people in the world who could help us. And the answer to my question will clearly not be found here with the sheep in the field. The answer to my question will be found with those who are wise, with the lawyers who have created justice there in the city. That is where I will go, and I will find an answer, and I will take my landlord to court and have my home back as it always was. So he walked all the way across the fields, and when he lost his way, he asked his friends that he found in each village, and bit by bit he found himself, feet underneath white stone roads, cutting a little, feet underneath cleared mud paths, stretching out and meeting other crossroads, and he saw the city coming up on the horizon. If the people in the city can build a home 10 times taller than the one I lived in all of my days, then surely there will be wisdom here. And as he pressed his feet onto the flagstones, stretching out in the city, he said, if they can make such smooth ground for me to walk on, then surely they have enough wisdom here for me to find justice. And as he walked up to the court, with the sculptures stretching high above him, gold and marble. He said, if they can make this much beauty, surely there will be enough wisdom for me to find justice here. And he waited his turn, and it came the time for him to stand in the court, and he watched the judge come in, and he felt himself sinking into the depths. The table was so high up. He stood, and he had practiced his lines all night, what he would say when it came his turn to speak, and then he watched as his landlord came in and shook hands with the judge. He forgot that quite a lot of them go to school together. And he watched as his landlord beckoned his lawyer in. He didn't have one of those. And the stack of paper nearly went to the ceiling with the landlord's case, and they smiled and they sat on the table near him. Well, said the judge, shepherd, so you have come to make your case against your landlord. Let's hear it. What do you have to say for yourself? And he took a breath in, but no sound came out. He could only feel the parched smoke curling its tendrils back around his throat. He could only feel the flames flickering out of his fingers and emptying all of his wisdom from his belly. He could only feel the emptiness of everything he had lost, and he stared up at the cold eyes of the judge, and he said, is there justice in this world? After the silence, the laughter began. Not kind and sweet, but cold. It bounced off all the gold and marble, all the sculptures and the statues and the columns, and it rang straight back into him, and it dropped down into his knees. Is that all you have to say for yourself? Said the judge. If that is the case, then you have wasted all of our time. Down to the cells for you, contempt of court. It doesn't take long in those places, by the way, in case you've not been there, for the red brocade and gold to begin to turn into dank stone and moss. You just have to go far down enough. And when they went far down into the spiral staircase, it soon became too dark for him to be able to see his own hand in front of his face, because you don't want to waste too much money on oil and candles in such a place where all the prisoners are. He sat in the darkness listening to voices, speaking one to the other, all of the prisoners exchanging stories until they ran out. Friend, said a voice in the corner, we're tired of each other. Why don't you entertain us with a story? And he tried to think of one. He thought about all the times he had felt low, down, coming back from school when he was little, his head hanging low until he was allowed to be a young man out on the hills, and how his grandmother had always soothed him with a song or a story, and he tried to summon them up from the pit of his stomach, but all that came out was the hard gravel of, is there justice in this world? See, this question was met with laughter again, but it wasn't cold and hard like it had been at the columns upstairs. This one was warm and weary. Oh, my friend, said the voice over there. Justice. You want to know if there's justice in this world? Do you know my own ancestors put their hands to the bricks that built this place, and I was out there only just this morning holding out my hands for a piece of bread, and look where they put me now. Justice, came a voice from the other side of the room. Do you want to know if there's justice in the world? Don't you think that's what I was up in the marketplace singing songs about just yesterday, and here I am for all my cheek. Justice, said a voice right close to him by his right ear. You want to know if there's justice in the world? Don't you know that they put people who look like me here before they've even given us a chance for a fair trial? You will not find justice in this place. I like your quest, said a voice by his left ear. I would like to follow your quest myself, shepherd. I would like to know if there is justice in this world, but there will not be a chance for me to discover such a thing because tomorrow is my execution. But everyone in this city loves a good execution. And don't you think that would be a good opportunity for someone like yourself to slip out in the other direction and see if you can find the answer for the pair of us? So in the night, the shepherd exchanged his clothes with the other prisoner. In the dark, he could still feel the fineness of the clothing on him. He had never had such a fine weave. He could feel the artisan's work enfolding him. Her heart beat at his back. And as that dawn began to pierce its way through the bars of the prison, oh, his fellow prisoner had been right. Everyone's attention was turned to the execution. Even as the guards came down, they paid no heed to any of the other prisoners, and up into the daylight he went. He ran up the spiral staircase, through the court, past the brocade, the gold, past the marble statues, out of the flagstones, out of the mud paths, out past the gravel roadways. Deep into the world he went, seeking justice for himself and for others. Village to village he went, town to town he went. At first, people treated him quite well because it was a fine piece of clothing he was wearing, but as his search went on and it became grubby, people were less interested in what he had to say and took a little more time with each other and less time to speak to him. And when he was aware of how he was being spoken to, he decided to give up on humans and see if there might be any answers in the woods. Maybe you felt that way yourself sometimes. He had not grown up in woods. He had grown up on valleys and hills. But they were sweet. The birds sang. He knew how to feed himself a little from the berries that grew, and he knew which ones were the ones not to eat. So he thought he would at least be able to survive. As it grew dark, his courage ebbed away a little. He longed for a warm fire, or maybe a little song or company. His footing was a little less sure. He started to dream that perhaps he would die out here with his quest unanswered. And then he heard it. Drumming. Oh, where there was drumming, there were people. He pressed closer, and he could hear that it was a dance and not a warrior drum. He was more sure that he would find food now. Into the wood he went. The birds had stopped singing, but they were replaced now by the sound of women singing. Where there were women, he was sure he would find good food. That's how it had always been for his whole childhood. Into the woods he went, closer and closer, the beat of the drum filling him with joy. He saw flames flickering behind the trees. He felt them pulling him towards them. He saw figures swaying in a circle, and without thinking about it, he dove into the middle of the circle. He opened his mouth and he said, "Is there justice in this world?" The women stepped back, and they stopped drumming. "Brother," they said, "why are you here in the middle of the woods, in the middle of our dance?" Perhaps they wanted a bigger story. He tried to reach down in his feet to find one, but he couldn't find anything better than the words he had spoken, so he let them speak harsh and hollow again. "Is there justice in this world?" "Brother," they said, "why do you think we're doing this out here? How many generations does it take before they change your name and change all that you heal to harm? Would you like to know our answer?" And they opened their mouths, and he looked into the eyes of each of them, and he knew this might be the opportunity to learn the answer to his quest, for they were willing to give him a story which was much more than anyone in the villages had been, but they had so much pain behind their eyes that he felt like his own might brim full and he might burst his banks. And so he turned and he ran from them before they could speak their story. Now he was in the thick of the wood. Now it was just before new moon, and there was not even a sliver in the sky. The stars watched him as he beat a path where there had been only wilderness, as he tore the junipers out from between his toes, as he let the thorns prick him, as he pushed his way over which plants he knew not in the darkness. There was a flicker. It was the kind of flicker that comes when there is glass between you and it. Some kind of warm glow. Not a burning fire, but candlelight. Some kind of candlelight. Perhaps the person that lit candles would be a little less fierce than the women who were dancing and drumming and singing. Perhaps they would have some shelter for him, a bed, maybe some soup, who can say? He felt his breath steady a little at the thought of comfort. And he came to a clearing in the wood, and he put his hand on the wooden door. And, well, you know, if they had wanted to protect this place, they would have locked the door, right? If they hadn't want visitors. So he stepped inside, and on every surface, candles. The candles that we had in the old times, the ones that are made of oil with a little wick stuck in them, but not all the same at all. Some of them, they were in glass jars, and some were in clay pots, and some were in wooden holders, some were in gold, encrusted with jewels, and all of them different heights and depths, flickering. He reached out to touch one particularly beautiful one, and as he did, a hand wrapped around his own. It was hard as walnut, and the skin was wrinkled like the roots twisted over centuries. And when he looked down into the old lady's eyes, he could see the two curves of crescent moons staring back at him, even though they were set deep in the pits of her eyes. What are you doing here? Oh, he knew the answer to this. And he summoned up all of the years of his searching, all of the hard skin that had cracked over his feet in his seeking the answer. And he said to her, "Is there justice in this?" Do you know, this is very beautiful, what you've done in here. Could you tell me a little bit more about it? I really like it. Oh, she heard his question. And she heard his second one. "Of course I can," she said. "I will answer your second one. The first is a little more complicated. I am the guardian of all the souls of the world. Here they are, all the souls of the living." "Oh," he said, suddenly completely distracted from his quest. "Can you show me mine?" "They always ask that. This way." And she led him through the cottage, and he found that it was a lot larger on the inside than it appeared on the outside. Down through a tunnel they went into another room that was almost like a chapel, then into one second one, a cave, a cavern that stretched over him, down through another tunnel, a warren, and out into an earth room. "There it is," she said. "Oh," he said, "that big one there." "No," she said, "the one next to it." Oh, my friends, there was barely a thumbnail's worth of oil left in that glass jar. Do you put families next to each other? Can you tell me, is that my niece, that tall one? I haven't seen her for a long time. Will she live a healthy life? "I cannot tell you any candle except your own. Now excuse me, I have a lot of work to do." And she was gone. And he looked. Oh, there is not enough oil in that jar for this quest to be finished. It was barely flickering with the last drops of oil. and they're next to it. Now, if it was someone who was related to him, a dear one, well, surely they, as he surely would, they would not mind giving up just a little drop of their own life in order for him to be able to continue and find an answer to his quest. And if it was someone that he didn't know, well, surely they would never notice if he had taken some, for they are out there in the world somewhere and they have no idea how many years there are left in their life. And so, well, who would know? It's for a good purpose, he said. It is with good intent, for good wisdom. And he raised up that thick, full jar, and he tipped it slowly over his own, and she was back on his wrist before he could turn it any further. She looked up into his eyes, searching him with all the wisdom of the long ancient night sky, and she said, "Is this the kind of justice you are seeking?" And he shut his eyes, waiting for retribution, for the justice that would surely come. And when he opened his eyes, he was standing in the clearing with empty hands. And he did not know if he had dreamed this or lived it, if he had tipped that oil or if he had not, if he was living, if he was dead. And he certainly did not know if there was or ever will be justice in this world. As seasoned lovers of story, you should know that you always receive the story that you deserve, because we cannot tell stories without the way in which they're received. So thank you for all the ways in which you made that story live. And now I would like to introduce our next guest, Human Nature Stories. Our next guest is an author, an activist, and an international speaker. He is the founder of Embodied, a center which seeks to explore and promote profound regeneration of land, society, and people. Over a period of 20 years, he was mentored by a group of indigenous elders, and ever since, he has attempted to bring two worlds together: an ancient world view which emphasizes relationships, interdependence, and reverence for life with the significant challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. Please welcome Mac McCartney.